Hi, and welcome back to Tech Talk. I'm Ken Mingus, Executive Editor at Computer World. I'm here with PC World's Michael Simon, InfoWorld's Serdar Yelp. I hope I get that right, Serdar. Today we're going to be talking about developers and what they're up to, whether it's a good time to be a developer or a bad time, and ease our way into some mobile information about what's going on after Mobile World Congress. So stick around. Okay, so Serdar, I wanted to start with you because you had this interesting idea that you wanted to talk about in terms of developers and whether it's a good time to be a developer, a bad time, or somewhere in between. So what are you thinking?
Well, a lot of this was triggered by an interview that I read in the Register with IBM Java CTO's John Dumovich. And towards the end of it, he made the statement that the notion that as a developer you'll have to learn Docker and Kubernetes and 30 other things before you can even deploy an app is something I'd like to get rid of. I'm quoting word for word from the piece there. And I thought about that and I said, you know, the amount of conceptual complexity that we have to deal with in this industry on an hourly or daily basis has exploded exponentially in the past, even in the past 5 years, let alone the past 10 or past 20. It's just become that much more difficult to put together something that from the outside would seem like the simplest thing in the world. Like, I want to create a mobile app. How many hoops do I have to jump through to do just that? Or, you know, I just want to put up a website. How many theoretical hoops do I have to jump through to do that? And how many of those theoretical or practical hoops are just inventions of our own, just ways of making this job more needlessly complex than it has to be?
Do you think is it the sort of thing where it's impossible to be a broadly based developer now? You have to really specialize in not only in mobile versus desktop, or Windows, Android, Apple, iOS, mobile. You have to just keep drilling down to the point that it's so nichey that you can't really do anything other than a specific thing that you're doing.
Yeah, I'm reminded a little bit of a joke that I once heard about becoming an academic. When I was in college and people were talking about studying literature, and one of my professors joked, well, nobody studies literature in college. People study Shakespeare. No, they don't study Shakespeare. They study the tragedies. No, they don't study the tragedies. They study the late tragedies. Just every single time it came up, it just got narrower and narrower. And I feel like the same kind of thing is happening here. You can't just be a mobile developer. You have to be a mobile developer for a very specific kind of mobile application. And I agree with that up to a point. I think that it's useful to have a specialization, but I also think that at the end of the day, that's just a starting point. It's good to have that as a job description, but it's not good to let that constrain you, because then you don't learn about all of the other things that are going on. You need to be at least distantly conscious of them. The problem, again, is that because there's so much out there, it's very easy to drown in it. And so a lot of people will retreat into a specialization as a way to not deal with that. There are people who will do nothing but work on one very specific kind of application because everything outside of that is just too intimidating. And that's not good for either them as a developer or for the industry as a whole.
Well, I would also think it would be potentially dangerous in terms of a career, because what happens is if you find your niche, and right now, there is a market for the skills that you have, but then in a couple of years, the ground shifts again, and suddenly you find out you're in a cul-de-sac, and you haven't, broadened your skills enough to be able to maneuver into another area fairly quickly. I mean, that, and then how do you know where that shift is going to take place so you can prepare for it?
One thing that comes most readily to mind is all of the people who spent years learning Flash, only to have Flash become rendered forcibly obsolete.
Right.
There is basically no future in that market. There's a lot of legacy Flash applications, but people are looking for ways to, get away from it entirely and scrap it, or just, convert those applications to something more modern. So all of the work that they did in that vein I wouldn't say that it's been completely destroyed, but it's had a lifespan put on it very abruptly. And that's got to be jarring for people who have tried to, they suddenly realize, no, there are no guarantees in this industry as to the survivability of any one particular skill set.
Well, I mean, but I mean, hasn't it always been that way? I mean, it seems the pace of change so much, especially around technology now, is so fast that I'm not sure of any industry that you can say, other than maybe developers broadly, that you're going to be safe in 5 years, and you can say that with any sense of confidence.
Oh, absolutely. It's always intimidating for people who come in and realize that there's no way to really fully arrive, that you have to constantly keep reassessing yourself, and that unfortunately you're not going to be in a position where you can get comfortable. And there are some people who are just never going to fully accept that. They want to know that there's some place where they can sit down and they can work for 25 years on the same thing and never have to retrain themselves. And I always ask myself, should we feed that misconception? Should we actually build a software, an IT environment where things really can be that stable, or is that just going to be misleading?
Yeah, I'm not even sure that it's possible to build something that stable. I mean, even if you wanted to, and I get the whole idea of having a career path. This is what I do. I do it really well. I've studied everything. I'm staying up to date. And so therefore I'm good for the foreseeable future, 5, 10, 15, 25 years maybe. But I'm not sure I could name a technology right now that will be in place and intact in 25 years or even 10 years.
There are some that you can identify as being survivors. Like, we're still programming in C,
Yep.
even though in many cases we probably shouldn't be. And, there are a lot of people who say, well, there's a good argument to be made that we need to have a foundational set of technologies that should not change, that should have best practices built into them so that we don't constantly have to chase our tails and tear everything down and rebuild them every 5 years.
Yeah.
And the problem is that the way the rest of the world moves, technology is supposed to be serving that world. It's not supposed to be its own little isolated thing. It's not supposed to be, some hermetically sealed environment where nothing ever changes. So it is probably unrealistic to suggest that we can build something that just becomes this sort of perfect, untouchable system that never has to change because it's conceptually complete. You get this a lot when you talk to some developers who come in from the academic side of things, and they have this obsession with the correctness of a particular technology, and they resist the idea that the real world is necessarily messy and incomplete and is constantly in motion. So we need to have a way to give developers a culture that allows them to stay in the loop constantly and not make it exhausting for them. To make them understand that this is the job. The job will always be something you will always be chasing, either your tail or somebody else's, because we're not here to do this just for our own sakes.
Do you think that kind of the rise of mobile, in the sense that more people are using apps, more people know what an app is than ever before? However, they don't expect to really pay much to use those apps. Like, how has that influenced the either new developers or even older developers into saying, all right, there's just the monetization of this industry has completely been put on its head, where we used to charge $100 an app, now we're charging $5 or maybe nothing for similar functionality.
It's very tempting to think that there's some way that we can go back to the old way where we could charge, $250 for something. It's not coming back.
Right.
And a big part of that is because mobile created the way mobile apps worked in general created a set of expectations for people.
Yep.
Once you set those expectations, it's very hard to take them back. Those expectations are things like it's instant, it's always on, it's easy to understand, it doesn't require any particular technical sophistication. And on the whole, that's a good thing, because it means that you don't have to have any kind of particular degree in understanding what's going on in this machine that's in your pocket or in your palm in order to get good results from it. I know some people who argue the opposite, that because these things have become so simple, it's actually made things worse, because it means that we're no longer inclined to be curious about them. And I didn't agree with that. I said there's always going to be people who are curious about them. That's why they become developers. Mm-hmm. But anyway, back to the main point is that, once you cross that threshold, once you're selling stuff for $5 or once you're giving it away and you're expecting to make all the money back in a completely different venue, that's it. You can't go back.
Yeah,
at least not in this lifetime.
I think you could easily make an analogy to look at what happened to journalism with the arrival of online. Our business, that you had these silos, and the Wall Street Journal, New York Times could charge X amount of dollars for a subscription every year, and they had a limited audience. And suddenly the internet arrived. Everything was free, quote unquote, online. And free doesn't pay the bills. And you're seeing this massive change over the last 15, 20 years in online journalism and print publications, et cetera. And I think the same thing is true for app development, and especially mobile app development. I don't know of anybody that expects to pay more than sometimes 99 cents for their app, or again, maybe it's free. And the amount of effort that goes into that, and then trying to keep it up across multiple platforms that are also changing in real time, makes it a very dicey proposition as a career, I would think, looking at it from the outside.
And there are ways that it can be made simpler, to write once and deploy across multiple platforms. And even that's not guaranteed. There are all of these subtle little things that creep in and make the deployment process more difficult than it really ought to be. But at the end of the day, again, regarding monetization, I really think that for the vast majority of people, there's just no way to get them to pay for this stuff. Once they've had a taste of free, they simply cannot go back, unless they can be given a very good emotional argument as to why they should. If you're talking about a really vertical industry, where there's not the same set of expectations, that's a different story. If you're talking about, say, the medical industry or point of sale or what have you, I think a different set of expectations do apply there. But for the vast, vast majority of people, they want free, they want it right away, and that's going to create this constant set of demands on a developer that's going to be very exhausting for them. And so I think the only way to really make up for that is just to give them tools that allow them to not have to think about the amount of tail chasing that needs to be done in order to keep these people happy. And we still don't have those tools in some ways. We're still trying to figure out how to make that work.
Yeah, I mean, much like journalism, I mean, people don't even look at the amount of man hours that go into such a simple little thing, to write an article, to develop an app. I mean, we're talking about, hours and hours of work, and people just take it, and they expect to take it. And there's, I think the push to a subscription model for people who want a higher set of features, just, much like newspapers, if you want to read more, you get X number of articles for free. If you want to read more, you can pay for it. I think that's probably the smartest way to bring back to some kind of a level of, of understanding or expectation that, we need to pay for these services or else they're not going to be made anymore.
I think another thing that helps is also being blunt with the audience about it. If you go, for instance, to the Guardian's website, at the bottom of every single article they run, they now have a footer that says, "We'd like a moment of your time. If you think quality journalism is worth supporting, please consider a subscription." They don't want a paywall. They don't want to make it mandatory, but they do want you to be conscious every single time you read something that they produce, that this is quality work that demands support. But app development is kind of a different story. People don't see it in the same way that they would see service journalism. They see it as, well, you're the company providing me with it. You wouldn't be in this business if you didn't think it was worth the investment.
Right.
Whereas with journalism, there's a little bit more of an idealism at work.
Yeah.
So, but I do think that the freemium model can also only get you so far, and it really does depend on what audience you're trying to serve. A mainstream audience, you may be able to get enough momentum with a freemium model that you can pay your bills, but that's about it. It's very, very hard to make the kinds of money that you need to support a really big development effort unless you have a separate branded enterprise version that enterprises are going to pay for. And that's a very vertical market again.
Yeah. Or like a pro model or something like that.
Exactly.
That offers a different subset of features.
Yeah, that. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say that's almost like an entirely different market. If you've got an enterprise,
it is. Yeah.
I mean that you can charge more. You do have specialized skills and apps and software that you're providing. But when you're looking, so you either go broad and inexpensive and say, please give me money, or you go narrow, deep, and hope that what you're providing to companies is so valuable that they will pay the amount of money that you need to continue to do that. But it doesn't seem like there's anywhere in between. It's sort of an either or.
Yeah.
It's one way or the other.
I don't think there is. I think you're either going to have to do, like you suggested, you're going to have to do something that will appeal to everybody in a very broad and flat way, or you're going to have to appeal to very specific audiences in an extremely deep way and figure out ways to monetize their needs in a way that absolutely nobody else can serve. And again, that's inherently difficult. It's not easy to figure out what people actually want in those narrow little niches. But I don't think we're going to be able to go back to the model where, you could just offer a piece of software for $25 to everybody.
Right.
Okay, well let's circle back to the original question then and see if we can get an answer.
Yeah, sorry.
No. This is exactly the kind of discussion. All right. So with that, as the background where we are, is this a good time, do you think, to be a developer, or is it a troubling time to be a developer, or both?
It's certainly a challenging time.
Okay.
I mean, there's in some ways it's great because you have access to resources and tools and possibilities that were just undreamed of even 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Like the idea that I could take a single, self-contained piece of software and deploy 100 instances of it with a push of a button is really kind of wonderful. But it's not the technical side of it. It's not the infrastructure side of it that I think is really the problem. All of that stuff tends to solve itself over time. The big problem for a developer these days is trying to figure out what people actually need and how to serve that need. And that's not something that comes naturally to the IT mindset. I think they tend to think in terms of, I've got this fantastic solution, and then they can't really think of what problems it actually solves. Last time we were talking about blockchain as being something very much in this vein. It's a solution without a problem.
Yeah.
So the real problem is not even so much, I think, the tool set or the technology stack. It's that developers don't really stop to take the time to think about what problems are worth solving, and that's why it's challenging for them in these times. Is because they're not educating themselves into what problems need to be solved.
I tend to be an optimist, and I think if I were trying to answer that question, I would say I agree. It's a challenging time, and will continue to be a challenging time for developers. But given the now fairly low barrier to entry, to getting started, to being able to dip your toe in and learn, again, especially around mobile apps, if you do have that $1 million idea, your ability to get something built around it and perhaps get it out there is much easier than it would have been 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. The risk there is that you may not be able to monetize it the way you would have. So more opportunity, but higher risk, I guess, is where I'd come down. I'm big, I think cost or barrier to entry, lowering that is a good thing because you have more people experimenting with this stuff.
But it sounds like the downside is that you're, at the end of the day, if you can't monetize it, you're just going to be forced to give it away.
And you've also got a lot more competition.
Yes, because everybody else would also be trying to do exactly the same thing. But then you could just from your own work.
Right.
You just hope that Google or Apple or Amazon buys you for a couple $1 billion.
Yes, or if you can find something that you can host as a service and you provide it as a service, then you don't have as much risk of having it taken away from you. But again, that requires an outlay. Maybe not as much of an outlay as it did before, but it still requires some outlay. It still requires some engineering.
Yeah. All right. So optimistic but dicey, I guess, is the way we'd come down on the to answer the question.
It's never been a better time to start being a developer, but it's a really hard time to continue being one.
Yeah, and successfully so in terms of a career. Okay. Well, I wanted to shift gears a little bit since we're now putting Mobile World Congress behind us. We talked a little bit about mobile and mobile apps and the development around that. And, there was a fair amount of news out of Mobile World Congress this year, a lot around 5G. Of course, the Galaxy S9 was released. And I just wanted to see if you guys thought anything, if you saw anything coming out of Mobile World Congress that caught your eye beyond the basic stuff like that, 5G and the S9 either.
Yeah, okay. I mean, there was a lot of kind of flailing at Mobile World Congress this year. I think there were some concepts. There were some notch phones. I mean, I'm just speaking from a consumer standpoint. And
you mean Android phones that will have
Android
notches
phones that
because
will
of the
have
iPhone
notches.
10.
There we saw a couple that were actually released, and we saw a couple of rumors, and we saw a couple of prototypes. Then we saw some prototypes of people who were doing fun things with the camera, like kind of baking it into the bezel and having it pop up when you needed it. We're at a time right now where the rectangular slab handset has reached its peak.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
like it's as good as it's going to get. Whether you're talking about an iPhone 10, a Galaxy S9, the LG whatever that's coming out soon, they're amazing devices. Maybe they'll get some more features. Of course, they'll get some more features. But as from a design standpoint, we've reached a kind of a pinnacle. And I think we reached it really like a year and a half ago. And now, Apple tweaked it a little
Finally
bit.
on
Samsung
board.
tweaked it a little bit. But they're slabs of glass that we hold in our hands. And the next step is, what do we do? What can these things do when they're not being punched by our fingers? And I think that's where we're going. Samsung has this thing called the DeX dock.
Yeah.
That's it's not all that useful right now, and it's certainly not all that mainstream. But it's a cool little look at the phone as a PC.
Yeah, a lot of potential in the enterprise
Yeah.
around DeX. Yeah.
I mean, these things
Potential.
are as fast as a laptop from like 3 years ago. In some cases, they have RAM. They have 3-4 gigs of RAM. They have 256 gigabyte hard drives. They have 2K, 4K screens in some instances, and 20 megapixel cameras. They're incredible little devices that can do a broad range of things rather than just taking a picture and making a phone call or surfing the net. And I think that we're at a bit of a crossroads here where, what are we, 10 years now removed from the iPhone, where the iPhone kind of changed the game. So we're due for a new transition. I didn't see that at Mobile World Congress, but what I did see is that all these companies kind of understand that we're at this kind of crossroads, fork in the road, where the mobile phone needs to evolve beyond being a mobile phone.
Well, is it a situation where, if you had taken a look at the industry 5 or 10 years ago and said, this is the end point, this is where we want to be by 2018, and now everybody's gotten to the end point, and it's like, the proverbial dog that caught the car. All right, we did this, so now what?
Right.
Do you, I mean...
And it's remarkable that we're here in 10 years. I mean,
Yeah.
it's, if we had an iPhone 1
3
next to this,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
geez.
I know, yeah.
It's an unbelievable jump from point A to point B in 10 years. I mean, the PC, I don't even think evolved that quickly. I mean, it's incredible how fast we've gotten and how technically advanced we've gotten with these little things that were, the original iPhone wasn't oh my God, I need that. It was, oh my God, that's so cool.
I don't know. It was pretty much, oh my God, I need that for me. I was in the middle of reading a review of it and ran out and put the review down and ran to the Apple store and said, I have to have one of these now.
I bought it on opening weekend as well, but it wasn't I didn't see it as a completely industry changing device.
Right.
It was a phone changing device, absolutely. But not to the point where I thought these things were going to be able to do so much in so short of a time.
When you think of the app ecosystem that has...
Right, and it didn't have that.
It didn't
when
have
started,
that, which is why I think, a lot of people did miss the potential here. But, I mean, you're talking about, the App Store on Apple, Google's got it. I mean, the development rush into mobile after 2007, 2008 has been incredible intense, and in some ways it's why we are where we are now. There was a gold rush, and
I think that's part of the transition as well. As he was just saying, I think developers are going to. I think the app model is going to kind of get absorbed into this kind of services model where we're buying pieces of our phone rather than an app that we open and use and close, where it's running all the time, where it's helping us all the time, where it's streaming all the time, or whatever it's doing. And these, our phones become kind of extensions of what we need to do during the day, not something we take out of our pocket to do a specific task.
The scenario you were describing a little bit earlier, where you have a phone that is basically a dockable PC. This is something that Motorola tried several years back, that they were pitching specifically to enterprise audiences back when there was a Motorola as we knew it at the time, and it went absolutely nowhere. And on hearing that the same kind of thing is being tried again, I'm saying, what would be different this time? What is it about this particular incarnation of this idea that would work now as opposed to then?
Exactly. Well, I mean, I think that's where the whole innovation question comes up. Is okay, we have these parts, we've got these pieces. How do we put them together in a way that is new and different and useful for people? And I agree. I think coming out of MWC this year, I mean, the S9 reveal almost felt like perfunctory. It's like, well, we got to have something. It's Mobile World Congress, and so Samsung, and it rolled out, and it was pretty much what everybody expected. And I had done an interview with Dan Rosenbaum, who writes for us on mobile, and he talked about how the big thing out of Mobile World Congress this year is actually 5G.
Yeah.
It's not, it's only that it's rolling out now and will be here in 3-4 years. 2020, 2021. and what that's going to mean for things like IoT and smart networks, things like that. But when I think of Mobile World Congress traditionally, I think of it much more as kind of a handset, hardware, what's new and cool, and what kind of almost like a CES for just mobile. And it seems to be getting away from that. And I think it goes back to that innovation issue, because at some point, how many new similar-looking phones with notches or without can you unveil? And I mean, what's the point?
Yeah, I mean, the design is it's almost going to become secondary to the experience that the phone offers. And Apple is light years ahead of everyone on the Android side in that regard because of iOS.
Yeah.
Android, Samsung's building they have this weird kind of side-by-side system. They have what they call the Samsung Experience, which is their kind of Android skin. They have their own set of apps, their own App Store, their own AI thing, their own AR thing, and then there's a Google Android on top of that. So it's at some point we had to figure out which is going to win out on these handsets. All these Android skins, it's fragmentation for one, it's security issues for two, but it's also it's killing the idea that our phone evolves with us.
Right. Go ahead. I didn't want to cut you.
I was going to say that we saw a glimpse at Mobile World Congress of two things from Google: Android Go, which is geared at lower end handsets. It's basically a stripped down version of the latest version of Android that offers a whole new subset of apps that are designed to run on low RAM, low processor, low resolution phones that still offer the security and the feature set that Android Oreo offers. And a counterpoint to that, we saw Android One, which was the low end OS, now kind of being applied to higher end.
Sort of moving up the chain,
Yes.
up the food chain, yeah.
And if that's going to happen, if more manufacturers, Samsung's not, Samsung has its own thing, but if Moto, if LG, if they start turning to Android One and saying, you know what, forget it, we just want a pure Android experience with steady updates and a 2 to 3 year kind of window where you're guaranteed to get major upgrades and security upgrades every month, I think that would go a long way towards kind of not just homogenizing the system, but making it more of a better, more iOS-like experience for customers.
That perfectly. Serdar, don't let me cut. If you want to just jump in here, if you want to, I'm going to make a point. But if you feel free. That the point you just made, Michael, dovetails with exactly something I wanted to point out, which is J.R. Raphael, who writes for us on Android, does an annual Android upgrade report card, which he did last week. And
I think he should have graded on a curve.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think. Well, but the point is, when you've got something like when you were asking who's going to win, Samsung and its experience or Android, pure Android. JR did his upgrade report card and found that almost all the carriers are failing to upgrade their devices, and the rate of failing to do so is accelerating. I mean, obviously, Google devices get the upgrades. Security upgrades, new operating system.
And there's only a handful of those.
Right. Right. But the other carriers are beginning to fail in terms of we're looking at where things are from Lollipop to Marshmallow, and the older the phone is, the less it gets. I mean, I understand why, because the people who are selling you the phone want you to get a new phone this year. But I mean, at some point, doesn't that become a self-fulfilling negative prophecy? Because it's like, well, why would I buy this device? Because I'm not going to get any updates. It's not going to be secure. There is the fragmentation you're talking about. And it seems like there needs to be some way to strip out the carriers and get them out of the way. They are in the way here of a useful ecosystem around Android, and they're making things worse for their own customers.
Yeah, that was the smartest thing Apple ever did.
Yeah.
Was they cut the carrier out from day one.
Yeah.
They made that deal with AT&T. It was exclusive to AT&T, but they said, listen, we control everything. You can sell the service, and that's it. And they've, since the iPhone took off, they were in a position to do that. Samsung and Moto and LG, I mean, they don't have the clout that Apple has. Apple sells more iPhones in a quarter than Samsung sells in a year.
Yeah.
Even though, of the S9, not total.
Right.
Even though it's the one of the most popular Android phones, if not the most popular, depending on what chart you're looking at. They just don't have the clout to say to the carrier. They need the carriers. You look at someone like Huawei, they're fighting to get into the U.S. market because that's, if you're not sold in a carrier store, you're dead.
Right.
and they're not going to just walk in there and just start dictating terms. Verizon will say, all right, fine, we just won't sell you. We don't care. We're just not going to sell the LG G7 or G8, or we're not going to sell the Samsung S10. And that's hurt Samsung, not Verizon.
Well, I mean, think about it too. Again, circling back to developers and app development, what does it mean if you're an Android app developer and you write an app for Marshmallow, and then you have to continue to support that thing for 2 or 3 or 4 years? It never gets an update. You write a new version for Oreo or what Android P coming up or something, and now you've got multiple versions of this thing on different devices across different carriers with whatever skins or changes they've made. I mean, talk about fragmentation.
Yeah, I mean, we're also talking about screen sizes, processors, RAM. I mean, there's a lot to think about when you're talking about Android development.
Yeah, I would think that would make it very difficult to be an Android developer over the long haul.
Plus, there's not a ton of money in it, even though there's a lot more devices. Apple's App Store has like all the profits.
Yeah. So, are there any last-minute thoughts before we let you?
I actually wanted to circle back briefly to the discussion about 5G, because something did come to mind when you mentioned it, which is how much of that is something that we can do with the existing infrastructure that we have. This is a question for both of you. It seems to be that there's going to be there's going to be a lot of interest in having it, but how much work is going to be needed to make that practical? Is it even deployable with the infrastructure that we have now?
I mean, they're building. Verizon has announced, AT&T has announced. I think all 4 of them have announced that they're building out their 5G networks. Verizon and AT&T are going to rely on 5G hotspots in the meantime, while they kind of deploy this new network. And T-Mobile says it'll be up and running by the end of the year. Sprint says it'll be up and running by next year in a handful of cities. We're not talking about nationwide. So I guess the answer is no to that. That we do need a new infrastructure. They do need a new infrastructure, but they seem to be willing to invest the time and the money into, building it in a relatively quick.
That would be a pretty fast turnaround if they could do it. If they get it out, even in
that would be
cities.
unusual for them.
Yeah.
I mean, this correlates with, of course, our bills will go up, but 5G benefits everybody. The carriers are providing Wi-Fi speeds all over the place. Consumers, we don't have to worry about getting home to do uploads. I mean, it kind of homogenizes the whole experience. So it behooves the carriers to get on board as quickly as they can, because they're going to sell higher price plans with more data, because we're going to be going through more data. So a 2 gig plan isn't going to be good enough anymore. You're going to need 4, 6, or whatever. And it keeps them current. So if T-Mobile does it and Verizon doesn't have it, that's a problem for Verizon.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
I was also thinking about we were just talking about the planned obsolescence issue. I take it that any existing phone, or at least not any phone that hasn't been introduced in, say, the last year, is not going to be able to take advantage of 5G, because it's just not going to be compatible.
Yeah,
correct.
Like most of them, I don't even know if there's any.
There's another problem right there.
Well, I was just going to say, what you're going to be looking at is almost the mobile phone and network version of moving from like regular broadcast TV to HD, or from HD to 4K. You have to have an entire new distribution system, entirely new hardware. There'll be a lot of money made selling new phones and selling new services and data plans and everything else. But I would think you're looking at at least a 5 to 10 year transition.
I mean, they don't even have the mobile chips capable of running of capturing those.
Well, the
those
mobile
speeds
industry
right now
is
anyway.
particularly well positioned to do this sort of thing because of the way phones are sold. We tend to buy them in these 2 and 3 year cycles, and then we pay for them in installments. There's not a lot of other industries like the car industry is the only other thing I can think of that even comes close. They're very well positioned to take advantage of that. But it sounds like there's that much more public consciousness about how much of a disadvantage that is for us, in the sense that it forces us into this cycle of planned obsolescence that not all of us really want.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable how the mobile phone industry has taught us to
time to upgrade.
$1,000, no big deal. I'll just buy a new one. I mean, I would never think to throw away I have a 6-year-old laptop, and I still want to hang on to it. But phones, or a new one came out.
Would you buy a $1,000 TV every year?
That's the thing. I know it's crazy that Apple Apple started it. I guess the kind of 2-year thing. Yeah. But now it's a year. I mean, every year let's go get it. I just spent $600 over the past 6 and 12 months paying off this phone, and now I'm just willing to.
You're paying off half the phone before you turned it in,
and I get nothing for it.
It doesn't help that they're also being designed in ways that make them much harder to refurbish in general. the Note that I have has a sealed battery. The
Yep.
one that I had before, it did not. And I said to myself, I hope this thing lasts me at least 3 years, because there's no way for me to change the battery without tearing it to pieces.
Right.
And they want it that way.
They do.
The
Yeah.
way they put it, the way they position it is, oh well, it's that way because it makes it thinner. I said no, and it's that way because that way we have no choice but to upgrade the whole thing instead of just swapping out the battery when that dies, as they almost always do.
Right, because in 3 years you're not going to spend $200 or $300 to replace a battery when you can get a brand new phone for X number of dollars beyond that will have 5G and whatever,
Better
and
screen and all that.
better
jazz.
screen and all that
5G
stuff.
sounds like one of the bigger selling points to
Yeah.
get us back on that treadmill. It's like every couple of years they have to think of another particular advantage. 5G is
Yeah.
just the latest of them.
Yeah.
And I'm basically stuck paying $56 a month for the rest of my life for a
Right.
phone.
It's like leasing a phone
Yeah,
permanently.
permanently.
I mean, I don't want to sound too cynical, because I thought about it and I said, one of the other things about 5G that seems like it's going to be appealing, if it's done right, is that it will give a much greater degree of connectivity to areas of the country that have
Yes.
never had it and that are
Yeah.
difficult to service. But again, that's all dependent on how much work they choose to do in that vein, because it sounds like we're going to see most of that work done in the metro areas where they know they will get the most subscribers and the
course.
biggest payoff for this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think this is the sort of thing where, if the country was doing, if the U.S. was doing this smartly, would find some way to, have a government push for rural broadband. I mean, you could use 5G to push, I guess, at least pseudo broadband speeds to areas that may not be served now. The carriers will take care of the cities. They know they're going to make their money back there. But there are whole swaths of countries, not just the U.S., but everywhere, where you don't have really good connectivity, where 5G might make that possible. But that's going to take something beyond just corporate push. It's going to take, government intervention or some sort of vision there to say this is where we want to go. We can use this technology to do it, but I'm not optimistic that's going to happen anytime soon.
Google,
Not in this administration.
No, not under current circumstances.
not government, but Google, Apple, someone could step up and say, that's their business model, and they could easily expand their reach by saying, Google already has these balloons and
Right.
things that they deploy in areas that
And
need them.
aren't they doing drones?
How much cash is Apple sitting on now? It's
Couple $100 billion.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, it's just surreal. They
Yeah.
could pay for this out of their back pocket.
Absolutely.
If they wanted to.
Yeah.
They probably won't, though. All right. Well, listen, that was a really free-ranging look at developers, mobile apps, mobile, 5G, MWC, new devices. Guys, I really appreciate it. Serdar, thanks for stopping by, taking the time.
Always welcome.
Michael, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and for now, you know what we know.